Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to PhotoJoseph's Photo Moment, the first live daily photo show, and only on YouTube every weekday morning, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. Unless I'm traveling, in which case I'm going to do it at a different time because trying to coordinate the 9:30 is kind of crazy. But I don't have any trips coming up anytime too soon. Although I'm trying to plan something. Could be fun. Anyway, I digress. Good morning, everybody. If you are watching live, as always, you've got the chat room right in front of you there. You can pull that up. You can chat away with me. And if you want to get my attention, you got to type at PhotoJoseph in front of it so that I can see that you actually have a question for me. Please do try to hold the questions that aren't related to today's topic until after the show. We get into the commentary section. If you have questions that are on topic, then by all means, throw them out whenever you would like. And today's topic is about minimum shutter speed. So this is a feature that is not in every Lumix camera, but I'm going to show you how to turn it on and why you have it, and we're going to cover those kind of basics. This is not a Lumix only feature though. I know this is a feature that you'll find in lots of different cameras from different manufacturers. So I'll show you how to set it up on a Lumix camera, which obviously won't apply if you're shooting something else, but the information is still good because it's good to know why it's there, when to use it, how to use it, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, it's not something that's in every camera, so you may not have this ability, but it's good to have if you have it. So let's start with the what and the why. So first of all, shutter speed, right? That's how long the shutter's open. If you have a fast shutter speed, you freeze motion. You have a long shutter speed, 30th, 15th, quarter of a second longer. Then if anything's moving, you're going to get motion blur. And that's a big part of what this is about. In general, we don't want motion blur. Obviously, there's times that you do want it. You can set the camera to deliberately have a slow shutter speed so you can get motion blur. It's a great way to make things look like they're moving. One of the examples, really easy example of that is cars. I should pull these pictures up, but I don't have them handy. I shot a car race. That's it. Once, and I have a series of photos in there that are too fast of a shutter speed, and so the car looks stopped. If you shoot a race car, even if it's really fast, and you shoot it at like 8,000ths of a second, the car is now a car in a parking lot because even the wheels will be frozen. Okay, I guess it depends on what kind of race car. But anyway, the wheels could be frozen. You end up with a car that's just stopped and you're going, wow, what a pretty picture of a car in a parking lot. Why is that race car parked on the racetrack? And so that's not good. So you want motion blur, right? A little bit of blur gives you the idea that the car is moving. And generally, motion blur on something like a car, again, using that example, you don't want the car to be blurry. That's important, right? You want the car to be sharp. But the background could be blurry, whoosh, little swishy background, the wheels spinning, you want those to be blurry, a little wheel radial blur on there. And that's all happens because you have a slower shutter speed. So you have to find the right balance of what the right shutter speed is for how fast the car is moving, how long your lens is, how far away it is, how good you are at tracking it, on and on and on. But it's one of those things you experiment with. Shutter priority mode is a great way to do that. And you go, okay, let's try 30th of a second. Whoa, too fast. Okay, adjust it a little bit. Let's try 45th. Let's try 60th. You find the setting that works for you. Great. But that's not what this is about. Minimum shutter speed is about reducing that, eliminating that, not having motion blur, and not necessarily due to subject moving because the camera has no idea the subject. Well, actually, the camera does know if the subject's moving, but it's not about the moving subject. It's more about hand holding it. Right. So if you have, let's forget about all fancy electronics and so on. You've just got a camera that takes pictures. And if you set a shutter speed that is too slow and you hand hold it, you're going to get a little bit of motion blur, right? It's because you're not a tripod, you're a human being, and human beings move. We flex, we breathe, we move. And if you have too slow of a shutter speed, then you're going to get some motion blur. You have something that's perfectly stable. You're taking a picture of a still life. It's not moving. And you've got the camera and you point it at it and you go click, click, and you look at the picture and it's blurry. And you're going, what? What? It didn't move. Well, no, you did. And you said, but I held really steady. No, you didn't. You think you did, but you didn't. And that's just, it's humans, right? And the older we get, the less stable we are. Just saying. If you're young, you're like, I know when I was in my 20s, I could hand hold a really slow shutter speed, man. I was like maybe it's an exaggeration, but I don't know, but slow. Definitely slower than I can now. Of course, now we've got wonderful technology like image stabilization that allows us to hand hold at much slower speeds, which is really awesome, especially when you get old and drink a lot of coffee. But the point is that there is a minimum shutter speed at which you can hand hold a camera. Again, part of it's going to be based off of you, your age, your ability to hold still. Some of us, our hands shake a little bit. Some are really rock solid. They're generally called surgeons. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but there's general rules. And one of the general rules is for a shutter speed, is 1 over the focal length of your lens. So if you're shooting with a 100mm lens, 1/100th of a second is about right. Now, that's the general rule for shooting film or full frame 35 millimeter. I actually don't know if when you're shooting micro four thirds, if you're shooting a 50 mil lens, it's 100 mil equivalent. Is it supposed to be 1/50 for the lens or 1/100 for the equivalent? I think it's still 1/50 for the lens. I could be wrong on that though. I really don't know. If anybody knows, please tell me in the chat or in the comments down below. But whatever. Point is that that is the general rule, 1 over the focal length. Okay, well, you're changing lenses. You got a zoom lens on there. You're swapping lenses all the time. Do you have to keep on remembering, oh, what is the minimum? I got to change it. Okay, I got to make sure I don't go under that, and so on. It can be kind of a pain. So a lot of cameras now have an auto minimum shutter speed. They have the ability to automatically determine what the minimum shutter speed should be, and if you turn this on, then it will do as much as it can to keep you from going under that shutter speed. Now, it's not going to stop you entirely. The idea is that you've got, as you know, 3 things that go into an exposure, right? You've got your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture. The camera wants to create a perfect exposure, and if you enable minimum shutter speed, it will do everything it can to keep it under that or above that, keep it above that shutter speed. So that means if you're in fully automatic, it's going to open the lens up all the way, crank up the ISO as needed, but it will get to a point where it's going to go, yeah, ISO's getting too high, or clearly you can't open the shutter anymore, so sorry, you can have a slower shutter speed. So the minimum is not a hard wall, at least on the Lumix cameras. It might work a little differently on other cameras, but it's not a hard wall. It's a soft wall. Think of it like a soft wall. You're going to bump up against it, but you hit it hard enough, you're going to go through. It's a good analogy, actually. I like that. Okay, so, my goodness. So let's see, where do we go next? Let's talk about, let's just see how to turn it on. Let's just go there. Okay, I brought up a new preset. Well, I brought up this preset again. Yeah, so I can do that. So we're looking at the GH5. Again, this is going to be, you'll find this in other cameras as well, but not every camera. You know, actually, before we go into that, let's just take a look at what's going on in the comments, because I've seen a few things flying around on here. Did anything come up? Omar. Oh, Omar's saying you're in Guadalajara. The tour in Oaxaca sounds great. I'm considering it. Oh, sweet. It's a little expensive when you earn in pesos and spend in dollars. I know. Sorry. But hope you can come. It'd be awesome if you could come. Marvin says that's really useful. The over rule makes sense now. What's 180 rule about? Oh, you're talking about 180 degree shutter? Okay, so Marvin says, sure, we'll answer this. Marvin says that's really useful, the over rule, meaning the 1 over the focal length rule. I swear to God, just take my watch off. Actually, hold on. It's do not disturb. I think I didn't do not disturb my phone out there, and so it's like going crazy here. Just go away. There we go. Okay. What's the 180 rule? I think what you're talking about, Marvin, is the 180 degree shutter. Do I want to do this now? Okay, I'm going to do it very briefly now. I actually have a video in the GH5 course that covers this quite a bit, but I'll give you the general idea now. If you're shooting video, usually the general rule is to shoot at double the frame rate. So if you're shooting at a 30 frame per second video, then you should be shooting at a 60th of a second shutter speed. And the reason for that is it gives you a nice balance of motion blur. You don't generally want your video to be super high shutter speed because it looks static. What's the word I'm looking for? Like it's not smooth. You actually want staccato. That's the word I'm looking for. You actually want a little bit of motion blur in there. And if you freeze frame it, you'll see a little bit of motion blur, which you don't usually want when you're freeze framing, but the idea of watching videos, you're not freeze framing, you're watching the video. So that little bit of motion blur blurs things together. So that's a general rule, is double your frame per second, your FPS. So what the 180 degree shutter does is, instead of measuring your shutter speed based off of a time, it's measured based off of an old an old way of shooting film where you had a disc, a spinning disc that spun around as the film moved by. So you have your shutter hole here, your film's going by at 24 frames a second, and then you have this disc, round disc, that's spinning. And that spinning disc has a gap in it. And the degree of that gap determines the degree of the shutter. So it's a shutter degree angle. When it's 180, it's half, my hand doesn't really bend that way, it's half a circle, the frame is exposed for half of the duration that it is there. So that is the 180 degree angle. The advantage of setting your camera to shoot video in degrees instead of in shutter speed is that you can set the camera to a 180 degree angle, and no matter what frame rate you put it in, whether you're shooting in 24 or 30 or 60 or 180, whatever, it always gives you the same half the time, so 180 degree angle, half of the time of the shutter, the frame being there. I'm like totally fumbling that. So again, doubling that frame rate to the shutter speed. So if it's a 30 frame per second, giving you a 60th of a second shutter speed. That make more sense? That's a better way to say it. So it just does that automatically because it's always half of the duration. Make sense? So that's 180 degree shutter. We can discuss that in more another time in more depth, but that's the general thing. That was totally off the topic there. Anyway, okay, let's take a look at this thing. So go back to this. All right, so it is, first of all, this is a still shooting feature, not a video feature. So you find it under still shooting, and there's minimum shutter speed, and you see it set to auto, but I try to select it and it says this menu can't be set. And you go, well, poo, why not? Okay, so what's going on here? All right, well, first of all, the camera is in aperture priority, which, sure, okay, let's actually do it this way. Let's go to manual first. We go to manual, still can't be set. Okay, that makes sense, right? Because you have control of the shutter, so you can't tell the camera to automatically stay above or below a shutter because you have control. Okay, so that makes sense. So then we go to shutter priority, and shutter priority, still not available. Okay, again, that makes sense, right? Because you're setting the shutter priority. Okay, so we know that this doesn't apply in manual or shutter priority mode. That leaves us with aperture and full program. Okay, which should work, right? Because aperture priority, you're setting the aperture, the camera chooses the shutter speed. In program, the camera chooses everything. Okay, that makes sense, right? So now we should be able to, so let's go to aperture priority, bring up the menu again, and minimum shutter speed is still not available. Why not? Because, actually just think about it like this. Okay, let's think about what's missing. It's an aperture priority, so you're setting the aperture. The camera's going to set the shutter speed. But if it has the ability to go, if you're telling the camera to control whether it goes below or doesn't go below a certain level, it has to have control of something else, right? It has to have control of the ISO. Because the shutter speed, if you've set the fixed ISO at, let's say, ISO 400 and you're shooting at f5.6 and you're telling the camera to go shutter priority, aperture priority. So shutter is going to be picked by the camera. So the camera goes, okay, in this lighting situation, it's a 100th of a second, this one is a 20th of a second, whatever. It's just changing. But you've already set your ISO and your aperture. Well, now you say, hey, minimum of a 60th of a second, and the camera is going, well, it needs to be a 30th of a second. But you want to tell it to be a minimum of 60th, but it doesn't have any control over anything else. It can't change the aperture because you're in your aperture priority. It can't change the ISO because you're in manual ISO. So you've told the camera to do something that it can't do. Therefore, it can't do it. So what this tells you is that you have to be in auto ISO. So that's the trick. So we got to go into auto ISO. Let's bring this back up. Oh, I guess you can't see the whole thing. Let's go like this. Let's point this down here. So we're looking at a lovely table. So I'm in my ISO. I've just hit the ISO button on top of the camera, and I'm going to roll this down to auto. Now that I'm in auto ISO, now when I bring up the menu, I should see it's available. So now I can set it. So I can set it to auto, or I can set it manually. And this is really cool. So I can go all the way down to a second, or I can set a minimum up to 16,000th of a second, and I can set whatever minimum I want. So, or you can set it to auto. So let's talk about manual first. If you set it manually, this is because you have determined that that is the slowest shutter speed that you want. You don't want to go any slower than that. And that's great, right? I'm maintaining this control. I have determined, I have decreed, this is what it shall be. And that's wonderful. Or you set it to auto. And then the camera decides what the minimum should be. And remember that whole discussion about the 1 over the focal length rule? The Lumix camera will take that into consideration, so what lens is on there. It'll take into consideration the stabilization that is built into the body and or the lens, right? So it takes that into consideration. It goes, well, we can actually go a little bit slower because we got the stabilization. And it takes into consideration how much coffee you've had that morning. Okay, I made that last one up. But it does take into consideration those first two. So it might actually be other things as well, but those are the main things, right? Your lens, the focal length of your lens, and the stabilization in the body. If you've got a newer lens with IS2 on it, it's going to know that it can keep it more steady, so it's going to allow you to have a lower shutter speed. Now remember, this doesn't take into account the subject matter, but, and now I'm theorizing, but let me tell you something. If you go into this camera, into the ISO settings, you've got auto and intelligent auto. Now the difference there is intelligent auto doesn't just look at the light in the scene. It actually looks at what's happening in the scene. If it sees motion in the scene, it is going to go for a higher ISO to give you a higher shutter speed. This is pretty cool. This I think is unique to the GH5. This is something the camera's got vector tracking, I believe it's called. It tracks subjects in three-dimensional space. It knows where things are moving, what direction they're moving. It predicts the movement that they're about to do or the speed that they're going at. It's all predictive. It's all part of the autofocus algorithm, a bunch of other stuff. But the point is that gets used in the intelligent ISO. So if it sees motion in the scene, it's going to opt for a higher ISO to give you a higher shutter speed. Pretty cool, right? So if we combine intelligent ISO along with the minimum shutter speed, minimum shutter there it is, minimum shutter speed set to auto, then you're really telling the camera, hey, be smart, do what you do, and keep that shutter speed keep the minimum shutter speed, not only for how I'm holding the camera, what kind of lens I got in there, how stabilized it is, but also what's happening in the scene. Pretty cool, right? There's a lot of automation that you go, I don't want that to take over for me. But then there's stuff like this, you go, you know what, that really makes sense. I'll take it. And again, it will not necessarily, it's not a hard, fast rule, right? If I set it to, I don't know, 320, let's try this. Let me set it to thousandths of a second. Okay, there's not that much light in here. There's no way that the camera can shoot at a thousandth of a second in here. So if let's bring this up. You see intelligent ISO is on. I'm wide open. Let's go wide open at 3.6. It's still giving me an 80th of a second shutter speed. Because it's like, dude, you can't possibly. And if I take a picture right now at an 80th and we look at the picture and we look at the metadata on that picture, we should see, ISO 3200. So I might actually have my auto ISO set. No, it's set higher than that. So it has determined, I guess that's the balance it has determined, that it's going, you can't get anywhere near that thousandth. This is where we're going to go without cranking the ISO up to infinity. So it's a balance. We like balance. Balance is good. I'm a Libra, so balance is always good. Okay, that's it. That's all there is to it. Pretty straightforward, right? Easy to set up, but this actually came in from a user's question about not being able to set it. So to that user, to that person who submitted the question, I hope that helps explain why you have to be in aperture, priority, or program mode, and the ISO has to be set to auto, or it can work. And that's it. All right, let's see what else is going on in the comments here, see if there's anything else related to this, and then we'll end the show and go into the extended questions. Let's see here. That we'll address later, and we will address that later as well. Super. All right, let's do this real quick, and then we're going to move on. Later on today, at the dear old time of, what the heck time am I doing this? My calendar went away. Anyway, at some point today, I am doing another live training session on Affinity Photo. This is the desktop version, not the mobile version. I'll come back to the mobile version next. But Affinity Photo, this is the advanced filter. So last week we did a bit of looking at the filters, and there were a couple of them that were a bit more advanced, like I need to build some particular images. So that's happening today. And then there's a whole bunch more filters we haven't done yet. So we're going to get into these tougher ones and get into some of the more advanced stuff. And then I think the next one is even more filters, because there's a ton of filter stuff in here. Anyway, Affinity Photos, that's awesome. I really should tell you what time this thing is at. What happened to my calendar? It's like gone. Oh, there it is. 2 p.m. 2 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon, so we'll be doing that. Yeah, come on by, check it out, it'll be fun. And of course, if you can't make it there live, then all you gotta do is go to photoapps.expert/live, and you can see there at any time any of the previous sessions, which I'm going to bring up for you right now. There we go. So that's today's session. Scroll down, you'll see all the previous sessions in there. There's the previous Affinity Photos ones, and if you go back, there's stuff on Lightroom and Snapseed and all kinds of pages. Look at 9 bits, so much stuff in here. I've done so many of these things, it's kind of ridiculous now. These go back years. I've been doing this for a long time. So you can see there are lots of different apps we cover. The live training's fun. As always, it is free to watch live. It is not free to watch not live. You can purchase it and download it, or you can sign up as a member at photoapps.expert, and then you get unlimited access to the entire live training library, kind of a Netflix model. Pay per month and you can see all you want. Okay, that's it. That's what I'm going to pitch you on today. Thank you very much for sticking around, folks. If you have other questions, just don't go anywhere. We're going to end this show and come back for the extended commentary section. We'll answer any questions you got, and of course, any other questions that come up to this, we'll answer as well. If you're not watching this live and you want to see the extended questions, extended commentary, then just click on the little button that's about to come up on your screen to take you to that video. See you guys in a minute. Bye-bye.